Hi, Gil from Testing Gil here. You know what I call AI a genie? It comes from Kent Beck. He says you can ask a genie for a wish, and he may grant it, but you may not like what you get. And if you think about it, all our interactions with AI are just like that, including code generation. Now, code agents are a lot of fun to work with, until you find out they're really code genies. And since I already mentioned Kent Beck, our example today will be about TDD, test-driven development. In TDD, you write the test first and make sure it fails. This is called the red phase. Then you fill in the code to make the test pass, refactor if needed, and move on to the next phase. Why is TDD needed if the code genie can generate both test and code, regardless of order? Let me tell you about my experience teaching my genie, Claude in that case, to write TDD the right way. Let's start with this. Does Claude know TDD? You betcha. It built the workflow skill that builds my features. Step by step using TDD. Write a failing test, write the code that passes it. But when it came to following its own rules, we bumped into a wall. This comes from the prompt I used to create the code. Each step's implementation should create just the code needed to pass the test. It comes directly from the main principles of TDD. It looks clear, right? Like I said, the genie knows how to describe TDD perfectly. But when it comes to following the rules, well, sometimes it takes a shortcut. When creating the code to pass the test that checks that the onSave event is actually sent, it created this code. The test requires what's inside the try block. And because it felt generous, the genie also added the catch and the final blocks. Of course, I didn't want these blocks, and the genie apologized. And it said, hey, this piece of code is needed for the next test. So I had to add this to the prompt. Do not pre-implement any behavior that was not asked for. And if you think this helped, it did. Sometimes. Okay, so what's the big deal? I got a bit more code than I actually wanted, and it even protected me. That's why we have a catch block in a try-catch. Well, there's a reason for this specific TDD rule. It makes sure, at least when supervised, that we won't add any unintended behavior without permission. This doesn't look like a big deal, because these were a couple of lines that I was lucky to find. But think bigger. How much code generated by code agent is not even reviewed? Lots. According to a recent research, 96% of developers don't trust AI-generated code. And only 48% of them actually verify it before committing. That's crazy. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. What if the code that it adds is not the code that we want? In my case, it's just logging an error. But what if that's not what we needed? What if it logs the error in the wrong place, and not in a common logging system? What if it needs to store the parameters? That behavior is undefined, and yet I got one that I didn't ask for. And you know what's even worse? Any code scanner or a tool that you will use over this code will not identify any problem. That's because they don't understand the process or the meaning of the code, or the actual risks of a real system. Any code reviewer would look at the try-catch block and will say it's fine. Well, it may be fine, but it's not what I wanted. There was no test for it, which is exactly how you know that I didn't want it. I solved this by adding a targeted coverage check after each step, which may seem like an overkill, but in this specific case, it was the main rule of the application. Only write the code that I want. Don't add any unnecessary code. That was my case. But in your apps, what is the genie hiding in plain sight? Unreviewed and unverified code may include the bug your customer finds. Genies do grant wishes. They give us a boost of productivity. Lots of code in zero time. But, like in all the stories, we may be happy at first. But after that, we need to pay the genie back. Now, tell me, do you know how much code in your applications nobody ever reads? And how do you decide which code does get looked at? Thanks for watching. If you like this video, like, subscribe, share it, and watch other videos on this channel. Until next time, bye bye.